Guys, today a full guide on how you should build Chasca, also containing a focus on her constellations. Let's go! So, first of all, I want to clarify something from the first video I made regarding how she's played, which will help contextualizing this video as well. As I said there, Chasca is an animal carry whose specialty is dealing damage of other element types. In fact, during her elemental skill stance, which enables her Night Soul Blessing mode, her charge attack will unleash 6 hits, and up to 3 of them will infuse element based on the characters on the teams, if they're Pyro, Hydro, Cryo or Electro, with the rest being Anemo. This is useful for the charge attacks because the element infused hits have way higher scaling than the Anemo ones. On top of this, through her passive, she can infuse a 4th slot with one of those elements, but in a slightly different way, and this is what I got wrong in my original video. Depending on how many different element types out of Pyro, Hydro, Cryo and Electro are on team, this 4th shot has a chance to get infused with one of those elements. Note that it specifically refers to different types, so you pretty much need a rainbow team to ensure this 4th shot will get infused. During the first week, I thought it just needed 3 characters having any of those elements, regardless of if they were different from each other. Oops, my bad guys. So basically this means that in many cases, Chasca will be dealing damage of 4 different types, and this potentially makes her builds kind of wacky. Right off the bat, the main question here is the Goblet. Goblets have a specific damage bonus type they focus on, but this isn't necessarily good for Chasca, because that will be buffing just one over many damage types. As a result, an attack goblet is usually the best choice here, even though as a baseline it has much lower value than damage bonus in general. This last thing is very noticeable in the fact that the damage bonus goblet and the attack one can still end up being very close if some specific hits are magnified more than others on some Chasca teams, like it's the case for Pyro hits on Fiorina teams through Vaporize reactions. Moving on, I've heard some people speculate that following the Elemental Reactions boss we'll get in 5.2, Chasca will prefer using an Elemental Mastery piece to an attack piece when she can trigger Electrocharge or Overload. This is typically not true, because she's just a character with really high multipliers, and excluding extreme AoE scenarios, it's just not worth to use her as an Elemental Mastery character. Also, from what I understand, it's not worth to use Elemental Mastery pieces on Vape teams either, because her Vape consistency isn't high enough that she can end up taking advantage of those. For the rest, just go for crit stats offensively speaking, with an eye of regard towards crit damage, because she has a crit rate ascension stat, and as a Nathan character, she will be using the Obsidian Codex that gives a lot of crit rate. Lastly, regarding her energy requirements, this is worth talking about because her burst does a lot of damage and as a result is an integral part to her rotations. Still, considering she's not gonna have an Anemo partner on many teams, her energy requirements are relatively high regardless, to the point she might need an energy recharge stance to burst every rotation. Having said this, her burst has high enough damage that this isn't typically too bad for her, and this also gives more value to the double Anemo teams with Kazuha, where she's getting a pretty good battery and a support that can amplify some of her elemental damage. As for her artifact sets now, for her own damage, the Obsidian Codex, so the new Nathan set, is basically a no-brainer. 40% crit rate, 15% damage bonus, no other set is even remotely close to this blasted thing. She can use options like Shimenawa, Wanderer Troop, but they're just much lower in damage output. Viridis and Veneer and the Scroll set are also options. These have supportive characteristics, as they will be impacting elemental damage for the rest of the team as well. Of course, if you're using other characters that can hold these sets on the team, like Kazuha for Viridiscent or Shilonen for the Scroll set, they're not worth thinking about, but in the opposite case, they're not too bad if you're using a strong sub DPS on the team Chasca can enable. Now, her weapons, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my content and my theory crafting, but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. Weapons wise, there is something I have to point out. As I said earlier, for her charge attacks, Chasca loads 6 shots and then hits opponents with all of them when she unleashes the attack. This is not a typical charge attack, and even code-wise, as of right now, it functions completely differently from other charge attacks. A significant difference that derives from this is that the Slingshot and the Amo's passive effects don't work for these attacks, as Chasca's bullets aren't counted as normal bow shots, so their distance isn't tracked at all. This kind of stings because Slingshot specifically has always been a nice free-to-play weapon thanks to its strong value in terms of crit and damage bonus. Still, it needs to be said that crit rate isn't that great for Chasca, because through her base crit rate in the Obsidian Codex, she has 65% crit rate as a baseline, and using any crit rate weapon on her will almost assuredly cause her to overcap on it through artifact substats. Conveniently, her signature weapon plays around this caveat by being a huge crit damage option. Despite its strong main stat though, the main value here is in the passive, which grants Chasca 24% attack and plenty of damage bonuses that she can achieve seamlessly through normal gameplay. This weapon is way above any other option, including strong 5-star ones like Aqua Simulacra, as the multitude of effects it provides for Chasca is simply vastly superior. Also, besides Aqua, all other options have some kind of problem, with Polar Star having a lot of crit rate and so being hard to use in terms of stats, First Great Magic directly contrasting with Chasca's Kate by requiring characters of the same element as hers to give her buffs, and so on. Her 4-star options are not bad, with Song of Stillness and Refinement 5 being her best free-to-play weapon, but it requires a consistent healer like Shilonen to be activated at all times. The new gacha 4-star bow that will be released in 5.2 is also good, since it gives ample charge attack bonuses that when fully refined. Note that the numbers here can change a bit depending on the exact teammates you have on your teams, with Bennett and Fiorina being the main momentum swingers thanks to the buffs they provide, but the bottom line here is that their signature is much better than anything else, just like it was for Molani and Kinich before her. Now, regarding her Constellations 1 is extremely strong. Remember before when I talked to you about her passive and how she specifically needs 3 different elements on team to ensure she will get an additional infused bullet? Well, the Constellation 1 brings that requirement down to 2 different elements and also makes her infuse a 5th bullet in the same exact way. Basically, it lowers the elemental restrictions on her teams and makes her much more viable with Anemo or Geo characters like Kazuha and Shilonen. On average, when paired with them, she will be getting 1.5 more infused bullets give or take a Constellation 1, which in a VIP team I calculated resulted in a quite massive 30% damage increase for Chasca, one of the single highest buffing constellations in the game. Now, this should be contextualized a bit more, because it should also be compared to what our best Constellation 0 teams are in general, not just the Kazuha and Shilonen ones, but since I don't really know the answer to this question yet, this is the best I can give you for now. Moving on, the Constellation 2 basically adds a 400% attack multiplier to one of Chasca's shots on every charge attack, although as far as I know, this additional thing can trigger reactions, and it doesn't count as charge attack damage, but neutral damage instead. It's a big increase still, less than Constellation 1, but still quite great. Constellation 3 is a classic talent level increase, which affects her elemental skill, so the talent branch that contains all of her charge attack multipliers. So, just like Molani and Kinich, Chasca has huge whale investment potential. I have to say that Nathan is really starting to look like the region of whaling, because the damage increases have never been so high for characters before 2024. I will probably make a more in-depth video on this at some point. Anyway, for the rest, Chasca is a pretty straightforward character to build once you understand what her kit is about, with attack percent pieces and the Obsidian Codex artifact set being the clear focus over archetypes. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check the top 5 5-star video I made a few days ago. Bye bye.